The House January 6th Select Committee held what is expected to be its final hearing focused on new evidence in its investigation. The hearing focused on the former president's state of mind both before and after the violence took place on January 6th, seeking to argue that this was something that the former president contributed to, and when it happened, something that he approved of. Among the three things that stood out to me were the committee's decision to subpoena the former president.
We are convened today not as a hearing, but as a formal committee business meeting so that in addition to presenting evidence, we can potentially hold a committee vote on further investigative action.
This seems to be an effort by the committee to place the onus on him to refuse to testify to them, and then they can argue that they gave him a chance to actually do that. The second thing that stood out was the committee's focus on the Secret Service. We knew that since the last hearing this summer, they received a big batch of documents and information from the Secret Service. The committee at times hinted at the idea that the Secret Service was perhaps acting too loyally to Donald Trump. They also alluded to the idea that certain officials in the Secret Service might have testified falsely about the level of concern when it came to what might happen that day. The final takeaway is the committee's efforts to establish Donald Trump's mindset. This was especially with regard to before January 6th, when they argued the former president was already planning to declare victory prematurely and in a way that would rile up his supporters. They played testimony from a top aide to former Vice President Mike Pence, who said that he and those around him were concerned about this even before Election Day. They also shared an email from the leader of a conservative group called Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton, who proposed on October 31st that Donald Trump would declare victory and that he would do so on election night, even before many of the votes had been counted, by pitching that night as some kind of a deadline for votes to be counted. What the committee was arguing was that people around Donald Trump planned to do this beforehand, knowing that people would be misled about what would happen, and essentially arguing that this was part of a premeditated plot to get people to rally around this false idea that Trump had actually won the election. They also noted that many of the people who were pursuing this idea before the election were ones that were pursuing the events on January 6th. The committee says this will likely be its final evidentiary hearing. It is also expected to release a final report, which the committee has suggested will come in November or possibly December of this year. The report should be released by the end of the year because Republicans could potentially take control of Congress in early January, at which point they could shut down the committee.